Good morning, everyone. And I was standing backstage and listening to the breach conversation with interest. So you can imagine that Mastercard might have a little bit of experience with incidents and data breaches. So just on that last point, I can tell you that many a time there is an information incident, and it is not a data breach. But you're be careful that your clients and the rest of your colleagues don't start writing breaches in the subject line of the email because they will get very excited for you. So just a word to the wise. Make sure they just write that there's been an incident. Let you decide if there's been a true breach. But anyway, good morning. And I'm here. I'm very excited to be here. And so thank you for the invitation. This is actually a year delayed. I was supposed to speak to you last year, and I couldn't. I had an unexpected conflict. And so instead, I'm here this year in my new capacity as Chief Data Officer. And so we thought we'd pick up the conversation from yesterday, two pieces of the conversation. We talked, I was on the panel yesterday where we talked about some of the opportunities in the privacy profession and just a little bit about where it's going. And so I mentioned when I was on stage yesterday that I would talk a little bit more about some of the trends and some of the changes that we're seeing, and actually the advent of my role even as the Chief Data Officer and how that came to be. And some of this comes from the changes that we've seen on the regulatory side and as well as we're seeing on the business side. And certainly our dinner provocateur was very, very interesting. And I've been asking some of you at dinner last night and again this morning for your thoughts on the topic, because I think it was very, very interesting. But I'm going to bring us back to feeling like privacy professionals and data protection professionals, because while I think all of us personally as individuals believe a lot of what he was saying, I think as a profession, I do think a lot of this falls on us to try to walk that line between trying to innovate with data, because certainly there's a lot of good to society that we see with data, but also trying to make sure that individual rights are protected in the midst of that innovation. And so while we can say that this innovation is good or bad, I do think that privacy professionals have a lot to say and a lot to offer in that space, but I also think we have to partner with lots of different types of professionals as well. So let me move on. So we all know about this, right? The data is the new oil, right? Everybody's seen some version of this. And I do think that this was part of the conversation last night, right? And whether we like it or not, data is being used for innovation. And yes, personal data is part of this innovation story, right? The new ecosystems have been created. And we had a lot of conversation yesterday about social media, but there's lots of other ecosystems that have been created that actually are doing a lot of societal good as well, right? It's not just our data that is being used, but there's a lot of other information that is being used and collected to really further advance society in lots of different ways. And I sometimes think that that gets lost in the conversation, and we, as privacy pros, oftentimes focus, and we should, on personal and sensitive data, but there is other data that is separate from personal data that we do need to think about, partly because it can become personal and sensitive data, but sometimes it isn't. But it does need to be factored into the conversation, right? So I have this other slide, it's coming up, right, that talks about all of the other types of data that may or may not be personal and sensitive data, right? If you think about it, we have climate data, not necessarily personal data, right? We have traffic data, again, may or may not be personal, depending upon how it's collected. We have travel data, again, personal or maybe not, if it's just the routes of the planes or the routes of the trains or the routes of the buses. But nevertheless, all of this information is being used and collected in ways that are really trying to actually improve the lives of many individuals, all of us, around the planet. And so there is this crazy balance, I do think, that civilization is under right now, trying to get it right, the balance between innovation and the protection of the individual. And I do think we are right now at this real significant inflection point of data innovation and the protection of the individual, and our profession is right smack in the middle of it, right? And so if you look at this slide, it can, of course, be slightly scary, right? Because this innovation, though, does really result in an incredible amount of data analytics. And I think that was the point last night, that the data analytics is very difficult to understand. And many of us in our jobs, and I'm going to talk about the job in a minute, in our jobs, we have to understand the data analytics, and we have to understand how the data is being used. And that's where it's not necessarily transparent enough for most of us. And that's saying something, because we're data people, understand, right? Never mind the average citizen to understand the data analytics. And from the data analytics, we create things called predictive models. And from predictive models, we're seeing things like artificial intelligence, which is really, really ramping up the complexity and also the innovation and the possibilities. And these are all really important things because we're going to advance some things, right, in medical science in particular, which is really positive. But it's also utilizing data in ways that is going to get harder and harder to explain. And I think that is sometimes worrisome and of concern to the individuals whose data may or may not be engaged in that process. We also have advances in education. We have advances in smart cities. And we heard last night that some of those things can cause concern. So how do we respond? I kept waiting for that punchline, and I never heard that. And so, I hate to tell you, my friends, our profession is all the more important because we exist. Responsible companies, right, responsible enterprises exist. Now, partly we exist because there is a privacy landscape, a data protection landscape of laws and regulations that makes us exist, starting, of course, with the GDPR, but not only because of the GDPR. The GDPR is a game changer. I will be the first one to tell you that it has changed things for all of us. It is a comprehensive law, but it's a comprehensive law that really, in some ways, has made us really change our data practices, right? It's not just a compliance law. And we started touching upon it yesterday in talking about the skills in the job market, right? And who we're looking for. Because it wasn't, as much as we're all tired, it wasn't really over on May 25th, was it? No, right? It's just begun. And look how tired you look. I mean, right? Right? Okay. And it's not going away, right? I talked about how it really is I can't say this word either. You have to operationalize privacy, and you've got to put it in the DNA, and you've got to put it in your company or enterprise's practices and procedures in ways that we weren't necessarily thinking about. And you can't do it as a tick-the-box privacy compliance anymore, even though some organizations tried to implement it that way. But now that they're beginning to get more data access requests or a request to erase data, they're realizing that all of their data operations are impacted. And again, we're seeing changes in California, the California law, in Brazil, right? We're seeing changes to the India law. And I had to put this one up, that the inspiration for the Chinese personal information law is the data protection law of Brazil. So I just wanted to give you the copycat effect. We don't know where they all come from, but that one was fascinating to me when I saw that one. I thought, oh, I'll share that one, all right? But there's more. There's more coming. And then there's other types of law beyond data protection law, and we all know that too, that's beginning to impact how and what the privacy professional and the data protection professional, and whether you're a lawyer or not, how you do your job. And look, we exist because our organizations believe that this area is important, not just to be in compliance, but because all of your organizations collect and use and have personal information as part of their business operation. And so we can say, no, you can't collect it. No, we're not going to use it. But is that really real when I would suggest that so many organizations need that information about their customers, about their employees in order to actually operate and, in fact, to innovate. Excuse me. No, we're not moving. There we go. All right. So what we're seeing is that as a result of this, privacy professionals have really, really expanded their responsibilities. And so this slide tries to summarize just 16 areas of responsibility. Now, let's be honest, there's more than this, so please don't yell at me at the break. There's a coffee break after this. So you can come up and yell at me and say, JoAnn, you forgot this, and you forgot this, and yes, I did, okay? This is just an attempt to summarize, right? But many of you lead a team. There's legislation. You have to review data use. We have inquiries. You have to report on performance. There's the privacy impact assessments, or DPIAs. We just had a whole panel on data breaches, right? You have to provide training. You have to maintain records of personal data or data inventories. And you have to promote privacy best practices, as well as privacy by design, right? And so if you look at all of these activities, they generally fall, though, traditionally, within a broad set of 3 skills. And so if you look at this slide, it's coming in a minute. No, don't go further, sorry. Okay. Traditionally, we thought about our skill sets in 3 broad buckets: compliance, and then privacy by design, and that's Ann Cavoukian's term, but right, trying to do product development or business development and having privacy as part of the product or business design process, right? And as you go up the skills ladder, as you start your career, you start out usually doing heavy on compliance, and then you begin to apply that compliance understanding to a product or business construct, and your skill set increases. So the yellow dots are where you have some mastery of the skill. The green dots is where you have mastery. And then further along, you get to do regulatory. Now, regulatory is usually, everyone says, oh, that's compliance. No, it's not. Compliance is where you know how to apply the regulation. But because privacy has so much emerging regulation, right, stuff that's just coming out, it's very sophisticated legal work to figure out how to apply new law and create the compliance framework. And that's usually done by more senior people who are also oftentimes engaged with regulators to explain the practical implications of a new law that's being written. How many of you have done that work? Any of you spoken with the DPA to say, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. You're thinking about Google, you're thinking about Facebook, but can you please think about the power authority? Can you think about us? We're a pharmaceutical company, we're a healthcare provider, right? It's a little bit different in that context. And so the skill set begins to go up. Now, there's an argument that not all privacy professionals need all of these skill sets, and you'll notice that in this slide, things are pretty legally based. But what we're seeing, and this is what you heard yesterday, is that the skill set is beginning to change. It's coming, right? That we have data is the new oil, but we need to refine it. That there's more work that all of us are doing on data. And as a result, it's no longer enough to just understand the compliance and work on the new product development and understand where the laws are going. Instead, we have this new world where data analytics, are we going? Are we moving? There we go. It's a little slow. Where data analytics and predictive models are taking up more time in the product development cycle, right? And as a result, your skill set shift is happening. And all of a sudden, you're seeing a broader skill set being required for privacy professionals. And we're seeing this new field of information and data merging with privacy professionals. Now, many of us did not go to school for all of these skill sets. And so we're adding skills to our teams, or we're working across functions. And some people said yesterday, work with information security. I would argue that information security is its own separate field protecting the data. It's a great field, but it doesn't necessarily understand all the issues related to information and analytics. That's its own new field. How the data is actually being manipulated can be very difficult for a privacy professional to understand. Never mind the technical infrastructure that it's riding on, or the data strategy and how it hooks to the product strategy and the business strategy. These are emerging skill sets that we are now having to answer to if we're going to hit all of the issues that were brought up over dinner last night, right? These are the new skills that privacy professionals are becoming data professionals. Our jobs are expanding. Now, people will tell me and have told me this. They've said, JoAnn, it's just job security. How many of you have heard that you have job security? No, none of you? I've got one person. Really? None of you have job security? Nobody has said that to you. Okay, I'm here to tell you you have job security. My problem is I'm not sure I want this kind of job security because it's really hard, right? This is not easy to have to learn and stretch from a legal-based skill set to an IT-based skill set, to a database skill set. And so what my company did is they told me to pick and choose, because what was happening on my team at Mastercard is we were doing all of this. We were doing privacy, and we were doing all of these skill sets as well. And so back last year, as we were getting ready for the GDPR, so I told you I'd come back to the GDPR, as we were getting ready for all of the work that we were doing for the GDPR, and we were building up our data inventory, right? And we were building our system for data access and retrieval. Why? Because we needed to be ready to go through all of our systems so that all of you could actually ask us for the data and we could give it to you. We were building enterprise data capabilities at a rate that we had never built them before. And my board and my senior management said, oh man, we need somebody in charge of the data. And so what happened is a new team. Now I had a team that was both privacy and information governance. And what we're seeing now is an emerging field and an emerging opportunity for the members of the privacy team that were doing this. So this is now a separate team, the data office. We now have a team called Data Strategy and Management that really looks at the decision rights and an accountability framework to ensure the appropriate behavior in the valuation, creation, storage, use, archiving, and deletion of, notice, information. It doesn't say personal information. Because we also recognize that information can become personally identifiable. So take location data. Location data, when it's just a location, is just a location. It's not personally identifiable, right? However, how many of you have a little cell phone with you? Ah, come on, you all do. And that location data, how many of you have it turned off? Oh, I bet you don't, but we'll play along that about a fourth of you have it turned off. For the other 75% of you in the room, you have been giving very personal information to your telco provider all day yesterday and today, because your location pattern data is very different than mine, right? I left New York yesterday morning. Trust me, no one has the same pattern of location data as me, right? That location data all of a sudden became personal data, right? So all of a sudden we have to look at all information, all right? We also are looking at processes, roles, policy standards, and metrics that allow for the efficient and effective use of information that allows us to achieve our data goals. Now, that's not divorced from privacy and information security. That's in addition to privacy and information security. And then the overall management of the availability, usability, integrity, and security of the data employed in the organization or enterprise. Can you see how broader this is? Can you see how you could migrate into this as an additional opportunity if you're interested in it? So this is just another view of what we do. So we work on data strategy, we create standards and procedures, we work on product design from a different point of view than the privacy team. We work on infrastructure, trying to get data as part of the design now of our infrastructure. We work on risk management and, of course, communication. And we heard last night, and we're going to hear, I think, later on today, that communicating about data is really actually one of the most important things all of us can begin to do. Why? Because data is an intangible asset. And one of the reasons that I think we have such a challenge right now is that it's because we can't see it and we can't touch it, even though all of us can rattle off data elements and we know what those are, because we don't know what it is, that is one of the biggest challenges we have in explaining how data is used and making people comfortable in how it is used for innovation and how they can control their personal information. And so data communication is one of the biggest things that all of us as a profession can do, along with data ethics. So, new field showing up. These are complementary skill sets to the privacy skill set that I showed you before. And again, these are not all encompassing, but you can ensure that what this is doing, and this is where it does again come back to the GDPR. I mentioned yesterday you get data subject access requests. How much work have you all done to make sure the data you're giving them is accurate and complete? And guess what? If you are in a connected ecosystem, others may be giving out some of your data that is inaccurate because they've transformed it. And they haven't actually given out your data, but maybe it's labeled as your data. We're going to start seeing challenges and problems in connected ecosystems around data quality. And so making sure data is available as part of this team, but also ensuring that the data quality is right, and that the data sources are accurate, and that data infrastructure is right, and that you've worked with data partnerships correctly. Can you see how different and necessary this work is going to become in future years? So this is the next wave of work that needs to be done. We need to work on ecosystem engagement. Yes, we have to do training, data communication, and the promotion of best practices around data. And that includes this big world of data ethics that I think all of us have to partner on. So I'm here to tell you that the future is, I think, particularly bright and interesting, because I do think that all of us, one more, no? I do think that all of us have incredible opportunities as privacy professionals and as data professionals, because we really are at a moment in time where we have a lot to figure out. Regulation is just one part of the two twin jet engines that are happening at this moment. There's this jet engine of data innovation, and there's this jet engine of regulation, and both of them are going to propel us into a future that we, as a profession, are going to need to, and we're going to be asked to, assist with deciphering data innovation and how information is being used so that individuals can understand how their information is used and that they trust and actually support innovation that society wants and needs. If you think back just even 3 years ago, and you think about how much innovation has changed, data innovation has changed lifestyles, everything from home monitoring to medicine to transport, all of that is going to continue. While we think about our data problems more and more because we are beginning to see them, it's no different than when plastic or oil was a new raw material for society. Everybody loved oil and all of the innovation until we started having oil spills. Everybody loved plastic until we realized the potential for pollution. Well, everybody loved data until they began to understand the problems of misuse, right? Well, guess what, guys? Who is your CEO going to turn to? Who is your general counsel going to turn to when you begin to have problems with your data? They're going to turn to you, because you are the subject matter experts. This is going to be the demand of the future. And so understanding the data in detail is going to be the next wave of what we all have to do. You can do it as the privacy pro, you can do it as the data professional, you can do it together, but I do think this is where we're all going. It's really exciting, it's really necessary, but I do think this is really all of what's going to happen. So, the future looks like this if you're me. Data skills will be key to success. So if you have kids, remind them of this. I think that partnership between privacy, business, data, and IT is really important. We all have to learn how to speak each other's languages because we are connecting across organizations in ways that we all have to understand better. We've really seen a change at Mastercard in how our business teams now understand both data and privacy in a much more deeper way. Understand the operational impacts of new laws. It's not just enough to do the compliance without understanding what it means to your business. We say data is contextual. I think we all really have to understand what that context is in your enterprise. Connected ecosystems and artificial intelligence, we're not talking a lot about that at this conference. They're only going to add complexity as the machines begin to learn from themselves, and it's harder for us to interject as humans. We need to make sure that we're laying the baseline for how we want those machines to behave. New laws and regulations, they're going to just continue to require us to have a deep understanding of data operations. They do now. They don't let us off the hook. They're not going to let us off the hook in the future. Data ethics need to be developed and implemented into the design right at the start. Start thinking this way now. Change brings opportunity for innovation, and that includes how you work. So even though you're tired from GDPR, there's an opportunity for you to think about how to work in a different way. Develop solutions that work for the future, not just for today. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions. Any questions? None. Wow. Okay.
Okay. So given the fact now that we're talking data analytics, and the data analytic people today not even knowing where the connection comes from, they actually don't know what the analytic systems are doing. They're just seeing the correlations in them. Adding AI and stuff to that's also complicating, as you're saying. That really puts us in a really tricky situation, because the data analytics do not need to take care of the consequences. They just have to find the correlations, while we have to see before the correlations are done what the consequences are. So I guess you're asking a really lot from the profession. What's your opinion on that?
So I think there's a couple of steps before that, before the correlations, right? So I think you have to work with your data analytic teams so that, number one, you understand their data sources, right? So to me, there's two steps in your data analytics, right? There's the creation of the analytics, and then there's the application of the analytics, right? So the correlations are part of the creation, right, before it's applied to another data set, right? And so the way we've done it at Mastercard is that we understand the data sources, and we've actually reviewed the algorithm to understand how it's been created and how it's actually structured and what's its intended use. So that's stage one, and that's been good, right? Now, your next part of your question is the harder part for me, which is we have algorithm A that we've reviewed, right? So if you think of an algorithm as an if-then test, right? So we understand the data source, we understand what it's trying to achieve, and we say, yes, this data, the sources, the equation is good, it's fit for purpose. The next phase is going to be algorithm A plus algorithm B plus algorithm C. Now, as humans, we might be able to do that, but the machine is going to take, 15 of these and combine them in a new way. So the question is, for us, what are the procedures and the protocols that the machine has to agree to, and what are the exceptions that have to be spit out and reviewed? That's what we're working on now. I agree, it's a lot, but if we don't do that, the alternative is you're going to just trust the machine, and you're going to then be responsible under the GDPR and other laws. So I'm not the one telling you you're responsible. The law is. The law is saying that we're responsible, all of our companies are responsible for the output when that algorithm is applied to the population. And my argument is that that's a much harder thing to explain, like why a decision was made on a data subject, if you don't know and you don't have any kind of protocols over the first step. Make sense? Look, I think this is very hard. Nothing that I'm saying is that this is easy. But if we don't start now, I think we're going to be completely overwhelmed, and we're still going to be held responsible. Agree. So you need some kind of framework, though, that says these are acceptable combinations and decisions. Anything that begins to get biased, anything that is not fit for the right purposes, that you've agreed that these are all the permitted purposes. Anything, I don't know, for Mastercard, I'll say gambling, or I don't know, predicts. Drug addiction, takes your purchases and predicts certain things, we're going to say is going to be disallowed, right? We're going to have to set up rules along those lines.
Thank you so much, JoAnn, for a very inspiring and interesting keynote.
Okay.